Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me say at the outset that this exercise, this responsibility in the Senate Judiciary Committee is one which I perhaps didn't anticipate when I ran for the Senate. But so often we're called on to judge other people, to stand in judgment of people who are seeking positions as judges, U.S. attorneys, U.S. marshals, even cabinet members. And it really puts to a test each one of us in terms of trying to be fair and be honest and to anticipate what will happen if we entrust that person with a special responsibility. It is complicated even more when it involves a colleague, someone you've served with, in my case for 20 years with Senator Sessions. I believe that I can take the measure of that man as he can take it of me, because we've heard one another's speeches to the point that we can give one another speeches. I certainly understand his philosophy and understand his values, political values, and that is making this even more challenging. I would like to make one comment about Senator Graham's statement about John Lewis. Senator Graham, I may not agree with everything that John Lewis has said. I certainly, if there was any conclusion about Senator McCain relative to his position on race or such, I would agree with you completely. I don't believe that he should be assigned any title that questions his commitment to racial equality. But I also believe that John Lewis paid in blood on the Edmund Pettus Bridge for his right to speak his opinion, even if I disagree with it, even if you do. And I think that's what you said, and I respect you for saying that. But when he was dismissed by the president in a tweet for his lifetime of commitment to civil rights, I found that to be below the belt and unacceptable. Day 12. This is day 12 of the Trump presidency. It is hard to believe or imagine that it's only been 12 days. As Senator Feinstein has said, this new president has issued 6 executive orders and 10 presidential memoranda, wide-ranging in the issues and subjects that they address. But certainly, they should give us pause, because if in 12 days this is what we have, what can we anticipate for the next 3 years, 11 months, and 16 days? We ought to understand that this is not just a hearing on a nomination, an important nomination. This is a constitutional moment. This is a constitutional moment and a challenge to us to envision what the next Attorney General will be facing in the remaining 3 years and 11 months with this president. Back in my youth, dubious about the wisdom of the Vietnam War, I marched around and carried signs, and so did a lot of others. And I found myself, when the Trump cabinet was being proposed, curiously gravitating toward Marine Corps generals, hoping that there'll be more and more of them in the cabinet. And my reason? I believe in the case of General Pettus, and certainly in the case of General Kennedy, they are men of proven allegiance to this country, proven integrity, who at that critical moment when they have to stand up for what is right will do it or will walk away from the job. We can expect nothing less of people who serve this country, either in our military or in our cabinet, and we can certainly expect nothing less when it comes to the Attorney General of the United States of America. I join with the statement made by Senator Leahy about Sally Yates. For more than 2 decades as a prosecutor and a person I work closely with in the Department of Justice, she is a person of character and integrity. What she did yesterday in issuing the statement saying that she could not, in good conscience, understanding the laws of the land and the Constitution, enforce the executive orders of President Trump when it came to refugees and immigration, that was consistent with what we have seen in attorney generals of the past. They characterize it this morning as the Monday Night Massacre. Students of history will know the parallel It was a Saturday night massacre that led to the dismissal of Archibald Cox as a special prosecutor in the Department of Justice, because he, in following the dictate or decision of Judge Sirica, called on President Nixon to disclose information and tapes that could be damning in that Watergate investigation. President Nixon chose instead to fire him, or at least to order the Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, to fire him. In response, not only Elliot Richardson, but Bill Ruckelshaus, the Deputy Attorney General, and Archibald Cox resigned. That was a key constitutional moment at that time, and decisions were made by people of integrity to stand up for the law and constitution of this land, even if it meant walking away from the office that they'd been asked to hold. We can expect nothing less. Now, Mr. Chairman, when Senator Sessions came to see me in my office, as he visited most of us, I was heartened by one thing. He didn't come in and tell me that he was the new Jeff Sessions, that he had reinvented himself for this position. He didn't try to do that, and I respect him for that, because we know one another quite well, politically and in some degree personally. So when he makes a statement when asked about the executive orders that he was not involved in the executive orders on refugees and immigration, I have to really question that. Based on what we've already heard from both Senator Feinstein and Senator Leahy, this article in the Washington Post suggests that he was involved. Indirectly, but definitely involved. The directives, as these writers said, bore Trump's name but another man's fingerprints, were also on nearly all of them, Jeff Sessions. An Alabama Senate backbencher, in this article's opinion, has become a singular power in Washington. Sessions' ideology, the article says, is driven by a visceral aversion to what he calls soulless globalism, a term used on the extreme right to convey a perceived threat to the United States from free trade, international alliances, and the immigration of non-whites. We know that it was his former senior policy advisor, Steve Miller, his confidant, who was mentored by Senator Sessions, who was credited with authoring these executive orders on refugees and immigrants. We also know that the Deputy Chief of Staff, Rick Dearborn, was formerly Senator Sessions' longtime Chief of Staff in the Senate. And we know as well, as has been stated, the mastermind behind President Trump's incendiary brand of populism, Chief Strategist Stephen Bannon, has for years been promoting Senator Sessions on his Breitbart website. It is said that Jared Kushner, in this article, the president's son-in-law and senior advisor, considers Senator Sessions a savant. Yeah. In an email in response to a request from the Washington Post, Steve Bannon described Sessions as the clearinghouse for policy and philosophy in Trump's administration, saying he and the senator are at the center of Trump's pro-America movement and the global nationalist phenomena. The president has referred to Senator Jeff Sessions as legendary. To suggest that he did not have influence or impact on the issuance of these executive orders is misleading. He had indirect influence at the highest levels. And let's speak for a moment about those orders, because I think they get to the heart of why this nomination is so critically important today. It is often said that those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. And I recently learned something I didn't know and should have known about the administration of Franklin Roosevelt during World War II. I admire that man for what he did for America and how he led us through that trying war. But I also came to learn in this book, 1944, by Jay Winnick, a former Senate staffer, I might add, that the policies of the FDR administration when it came to refugees and immigrants were not admirable and certainly not right. A man by the name of Broderick Long served as a major advisor in the administration. Breckinridge Long, I'm sorry, served as a major advisor in the FDR administration. A controversial man, Long's, and I quote from the Winnick book, Long's unwavering belief was that all refugees were potential spies and constitute a menace to the U.S. national security. In slur after slur, Long made it clear that he thought ill of virtually anyone who didn't have his social values or came from his social class, didn't think much of liberals, disliked Catholics, New Yorkers, Eastern Europeans, and Mr. Long despised Jews most of all. To run afoul of his anti-immigration hysteria in those days often came with a cost. He even interpreted the desire to allow British refugee children into the United States as an enormous psychosis on the part of the American people. Hard to imagine that in the FDR administration, that was the feeling. And what was the result? We know the story of the SS St. Louis, a ship with 900 trying to escape Nazi Germany, came to the United States and was turned away. We know that several hundred of those potential refugees perished in the Holocaust. And that was a decision made for which many of us are saddened and, in many ways, hurt. So where are we today? We're in a different America, an America which, after World War II, and the fact that we systematically excluded Jewish refugees during World War II, we're in America that views refugees, at least until now, in a much different way. Think about the hundreds of thousands of Cuban refugees that we have allowed into the United States, proud that they are our fellow citizens in this country. They were leaving a regime headed by Fidel Castro, a friend of our mortal enemy in the Cold War, the Soviet Union. And as they came to the United States, did we do extreme vetting? No. We said, if you're looking for freedom, this is where you'll find it. They have become an integral part of America, an important part of America, and they are represented here in the United States Senate by 3 different colleagues. Think about those who were Jewish in the Soviet Union, who wanted to escape persecution. Did we say, stop? You're Russians, and Russians are our enemies. We're going to put you through extreme vetting. No. We welcomed over 100,000 of them to the United States, and thank God we did. Showing again who we are and what we stand for. It happened after Vietnam. It happened after the fall of Yugoslavia. It happened time and again as we set an example for the world when it came to refugees. And now, where are we today? Because of the executive orders of this president, he has called into question over a half-century commitment to accepting refugees from around the world. People who have been victims of persecution and genocide and terrorism and war are to be excluded. And is it because of a real threat to our country? Exactly how many Syrian refugees have been accused of terrorism in the United States of America?
None.
None. Not one. And when you do the lengthy history of 40 years plus of all of the millions of refugees who come in this country, you could count on one hand those who have done us wrong. And they were let into the country long before the vetting we now have in place. It is disgraceful. The language that was used during the campaign by candidate Donald Trump when it came to refugees, disgraceful. I met with these Syrian refugee families, and many have. I welcome those who are critical of them to take a few minutes and meet them and hear their stories. And you will come to realize what is at stake here. It is our reputation in the world. And when President Donald Trump offers these executive orders, authored by Senator Sessions, former staffers, of course we have questions. And we should.
This is very interesting.
This, to me, gets to the heart of why we are having this hearing and why we are spending this time. Since World War II, we have tried to set a standard for the world. I am saddened that 12 days into this administration, President Trump is trying to redefine America in the eyes of the world. Much is said in earlier comments about Senator Sessions' work on criminal justice reform. I have a unique and personal perspective on that. Senator Sessions and I have disagreed on a lot of issues. There was one, though, that we tried to work together on, and we achieved something. I've cast thousands of votes as a member of the House and the Senate. I am proud of almost all of them, but I'm embarrassed by one. And I'll tell you what it was, because it should be a matter of record here as we debate this nomination of Senator Sessions. I'm turning to a book here called White Rage by Carol Anderson, who teaches at Emory. I gave a copy of this book to Senator Sessions when he came by my office because I was hoping he might get a chance to read it. Dr. Anderson talks about 1986 when Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which stipulated mandatory sentencing and emphasized punishment over treatment. It created a 100-to-1 disparity in sentencing between crack and cocaine based on the myth that the cheap narcotic rock was more addictive than its powder form. I remember those days. I was in the House. It was also the time when a spectacular basketball player from Maryland, Lynn Bias, overdosed on cocaine and died. At the same time, we were told there's a new form of cocaine on the street. It is dirt cheap, it is lethal, it is addictive, and if a pregnant woman uses it, she's going to cause incalculable harm to a fetus. And so I voted. Sad to say, I voted for this Anti-Drug Abuse Act, the 100-to-1 sentencing. Over years, I came to realize what a terrible mistake I'd made as we filled our prisons across America, primarily with African Americans, for interminably long sentences under the mandatory sentencing of that law. So I set out to do something about it in the Senate. I introduced a bill that brought that disparity from 100-to-1 to 1-to-1, reflecting the reality that there was no difference between powder cocaine and crack cocaine, and they should be sentenced accordingly. At the time, Senator Graham, who stepped away, had a measure which reduced it from 100-to-1 to 10-to-1. Senator Sessions and measure to reduce it to 20-to-1. Each of those was an improvement, and I finally came down to a direct negotiation with Senator Sessions. Could he and I agree on a number to bring some justice to this unjust situation? I can't tell you how we reached it, but we did. We reached the number 18, and that was the Fair Sentencing Act. And it said that the disparity would be reduced from 100-to-1 to 18-to-1. The net impact of that affected thousands of federal prisoners who were given a chance to have their prison sentences under this old 100-to-1 law reviewed individually by judges and prosecutors to see if they'd be allowed to be freed. Many were. We saved thousands of prison years in the federal system because of the bill that I co-sponsored with Senator Sessions. It passed this committee, it passed the floor of the Senate by a voice vote, and the same thing in the Senate in both the House Judiciary Committee, in the House Judiciary Committee and on the floor, and it was signed in an almost private ceremony by President Obama, which Senator Sessions and I attended. I then turned to Senator Sessions and said, but what of those who are now serving time who can't, under our law as written, have the right to appeal their unjust sentence? Will you join me in a letter to the Sentencing Commission encouraging them to give these individual prisoners a chance? And he said no. I then asked him to join me with Senator Grassley in the Criminal Justice Reform Bill, which for the almost 5,000 remaining prisoners, 100-to-1, they would get that individual consideration. And he said no. So there was that shining moment when we worked together to bring it to 18-to-1. But little or no follow-through when it came to what I considered to be a consistent approach in dealing with justice in criminal sentencing. When Senator Sessions came by my office, we talked about a lot of things, but I talked especially about one prisoner who I invited to his hearing. His name is Alton Mills. He's from the city of Chicago. He made a terrible mistake as a young man in Chicago. He got involved in street-level sales of drugs. He was arrested several times, and the first 2 times did not spend a day in jail, but the third time, on a 3 strikes and you're out sentencing, at the age of 24, was given a life sentence for the sale of drugs. Fortunately, in December of 2015, President Obama commuted Alton Mills' sentence. At that time, he had served 22 years in federal prison. Under the Obama administration, Justice Department prosecutors were directed that for low-level offenders like Alton, they should use their discretion and not seek enhancements like the one that led to Alton's life sentence. Senator Sessions, unfortunately, strongly opposed those guidelines. When it came to clemency, Senator Sessions has fiercely criticized President Obama's commutations. He said, and I quote, "Those commutations were issued in a, quote, unprecedented, reckless manner." And in his words, Senator Sessions said, "So-called low-level nonviolent offenders simply do not exist in the federal system." What I said at the hearing, I'll say today, Senator Sessions, meet Alton Mills and tell me that these low-level nonviolent offenders don't exist in our federal system. When it came to changing the law that led to Alton's sentence, Senator Sessions led the opposition. To sum it up, he has staunchly opposed using prosecutorial discretion, clemency, and legislation to address the plight of thousands of people like Alton Mills still serving unjust sentences in federal prisons around the country. That doesn't leave any options for bringing about a just outcome, and it's one of the major concerns I have as he seeks this office of Attorney General. On the issue of civil rights, I feel this with special intensity. I was fortunate to chair a subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Human Rights Committee on this Judiciary Committee. And watching the passage of state laws imposing voter IDs and reducing the opportunities for early voting, I took this subcommittee on the road. We went to Ohio and Florida. We brought in election officials from both political parties, put them under oath, and asked them point blank, what were the incidents of voter fraud in your states which led your state legislatures to change the law and make it more difficult for people to vote in your states? Without exception, they said there were none. How many people were prosecuted for voter fraud in Ohio or Florida before you started demanding voter IDs? Virtually none. This effort to suppress votes continues across America, sponsored by some of the strongest special interest groups in our country. The decision that was made by the Supreme Court, which changed the Voting Rights Act, was one which was applauded by Senator Sessions. It took away the authority which we had as a federal government to police these state laws and make sure that they didn't discriminate against people who were seeking the right to vote across our country. I listened to Senator Sessions say that it was good for the South that the law was changed by the Supreme Court. I have no particular animus against anyone in any part of our country. Wherever there is an effort to suppress votes, wherever there is voter discrimination, we need to stand up and speak out, whatever state may be involved, north, south, east, or west. I do not have confidence that Senator Sessions, as Attorney General, will do that. And that, to me, is a troubling thing to say, but one that I'm sorry to say is a reality. I could go through so many other issues that have been noted here. His views on torture, his views and votes on women's health, the views on VAWA. I agree with Senator Grassley to this extent. There isn't a one of us that hasn't been involved in a campaign where somebody took a vote and twisted it into something that we never believed to be our true position. But consistently, time and time again, Senator Sessions has voted against protection for crime victims, LGBT victims, women who are victims, Native Americans, and so many others. When Senator Leahy offered his basic resolution in this committee on religion, we had a stark but simple choice. Were we going to stand behind the Constitution, which has for more than 2 centuries spelled out in the simplest terms, but the most important terms, our position on religion? Everyone on the committee but 4 voted with Senator Leahy in a bipartisan vote. One of those 4 is a man who now seeks to be the Attorney General of the United States. We are now dealing with a ban on refugees and immigrants. We are dealing with a ban which even the President has acknowledged on Christian broadcasting shows preference for one religion over another. That is inconsistent with the values of this country, and I have no confidence that Senator Sessions will confront him with that grim reality. I'd like to call the attention of the committee to the testimony of Michael Mukasey, who was brought as a witness for Senator Sessions and testified under oath about his experience as Attorney General of the United States. I did not vote for him because of his position on torture. But I respectfully tried to ask him questions. And I went to the question about the Russian involvement in this last election campaign and asked him specifically about the FBI investigation of this Russian involvement in the campaign. Michael Mukasey, with a brevity of words, said, "The FBI works for the Attorney General." As Attorney General, Mr. Mukasey, did you have the authority to stop an FBI investigation? Yes. So many of us wrote a set of questions to Senator Sessions afterwards. Will you use your power as Attorney General to impede an investigation of the Russian involvement in this last presidential election, or even stop such an investigation? Do you know what his answer was? He said he did not have the time to read the unclassified intelligence memo, which we have all read, that summarized this Russian involvement. That is either willful blindness or willful ignorance on his part, not to realize the gravity of this. What happened in this presidential election on Election Day was a day that will live in cyber infamy. This was an attempt by a foreign power with values inconsistent with the United States to change the outcome of our election, specifically to benefit the current president and to defeat Hillary Clinton. Is that worth an investigation? I came to the Senate 20 years ago, as did Senator Sessions. And when I arrived in the Senate as a member of the Government Affairs Committee, we were welcomed into a hearing chaired by Fred Thompson of Tennessee, Ranking Member John Glenn, and the question before us 20 years ago was the involvement of the government of China in the Clinton-Gore campaign. We spent months in public hearings on that question. Because of some ham-handed decision by the Clinton-Gore campaign, God forbid, to accept campaign checks from Buddhist nuns, there was nothing that pointed to the involvement of the Chinese government, but we went on for months. And months later, formal reports were issued. And yet, look at the response of the Republican majority now to the suggestion that the Russians were involved in this presidential campaign, a fact which every major intelligence agency of this country has confirmed. Do you see the same kind of anger and commitment and excitement? Not at all. They've dismissed it with a boys will be boys shrug. The only hope we have to ever get to the truth of this is a thorough FBI investigation. And now we are being asked to appoint an Attorney General who will not give us his word that he would not stop such an investigation or impede it. That, to me, disqualifies him when it comes to this important responsibility. And so I come to this conclusion, despite my personal relationships, my working with Senator Sessions, my respect for his family, that he is the wrong person for this job. We need someone with unquestioned strength, values, and integrity, who at that critical constitutional moment is prepared to stand up to this president or any president and say, you are wrong, and if you insist on doing this, I will resign. I cannot picture this man who has been described by the Trump advisors as a savant and legendary, having the will or determination to do that. And for that reason, I oppose the nomination of Jeff Sessions as Attorney General of the United States.